Everybody, I'm Tom, and along with Alex and Sarah, we are Team Tarbell. So we're going to show you how we were able to contribute to an open source project that allows its users to create and edit websites fairly easily regardless of their experience with web development. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the problem-solving process. So once we had kind of narrowed down what contribution we wanted to make, just kind of the initial steps we took to start to tackle this problem. And then I'll hand things over to Alex, who will give you all a more in-depth viewing of the actual solution that we were able to come up with. So just a little bit of background. Tarbell is a lightweight web publishing platform that actually allows its users to edit content very easily with Google Spreadsheets. And it's actually based in Chicago out of the, it's a Chicago Tribune news application team. So we were actually able to get in contact with one of the lead developers, and that's kind of been the really cool component of the work that we've been doing, is that we've been able to speak directly with the developers and kind of see what they would like to see out of our contributions. So originally we were looking to implement a web interface, but that wasn't really feasible for the scope of this project. We kind of bit off a little bit more than we could chew. So we spoke with David, and one of the main issues that users were having is if they were stepping through their website and they got to an error page, then they would just get a trace back that wasn't very helpful. So what we decided to do is we were going to create custom error pages for some of the common issues that users were experiencing that were informative and useful to people who might not be as experienced with the kind of debuggers that were implemented already. So the first thing that we kind of started to do is we all met as a group, and we were emailing this guy David, our connection, our developer friend, and we spoke with him, and we were able to start to trace through some of the code and see where these errors were being handled. And it turns out we were dealing with this app.py file, and I got some notes written down on my notepad around this 360, 400 line. That's kind of where we started to look in the actual code to see where, these errors were being handled. So we knew that we were going to have to do some kind of try except. So that was really kind of the first task that we had to deal with, was finding out where in the code we would actually be checking for these errors. And the second task that we were looking to accomplish, as I mentioned before, which was creating our own custom error pages. So we did a few Google searches, and I know we're not dealing with WordPress specifically, but it is a similar application. So, understanding web error handling, that was something that I kind of needed to read up on a little bit more, in editing an error 404, which we weren't dealing with a 404 necessarily. Some of the issues that were the most prominent, I think we mentioned in our last video, were, since Tarbell does use Google Spreadsheets, if Google was down, then they would get an error, so we would have to handle that, and relay the information back to them. So we also looked at how to create these error pages and overriding the default templates, which is kind of like central to the issue that we were dealing with, since we had these existing error pages that would generate, but we were looking to implement our own. And then finally, where we were able to make pretty significant progress was the actual error code. And this is kind of where Alex's solution starts to come into play, because he's the one who found this site with the catching the 500 error. So that was pretty much the two kind of major steps that once we had moved on from this idea of creating a web interface and realized that we were going to work on something more practical and plausible for the remaining scope of this course, we needed to figure out how to handle the errors and where in the code we were going to do that. And then we had to figure out how to display our own error page. So that being said, I'm going to hand things over to Alex, who will actually dive headfirst into the solution that we came up with.
Hi everybody, my name is Alex Kenney, and as Tom said, I'm going to show you the error that we were getting in Flask and exactly what we did to go about helping fix it, so that hopefully for future people using the project, they'll know what they can do. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you what the ugly version of the traceback error looks like, and then I'll go through and show you what the much prettier web page we made and why it's much easier to follow using the method we just created. So the first thing to do is create a new project. So I'll go Tarbell, new project, and now it will give me a few prompts. First one, what I name it. So I'll name it error. It gives me a place to put it, so I'll keep it in the default. And then I'm just going to name the actual title error test. We've been using basic Bootstrap 3 for most of the stuff, so I'll keep using that. And now it's going to initialize a Git repository for me. It asks if I want to use a Google spreadsheet. Yes, that's the basis for the error that we found is within the Google key, so I need to create a spreadsheet for it. And I'll use the default email address there. Now it's creating the Google spreadsheet for me, and it's completed. So now it asks, do I want a GitHub repo? I'm not going to worry about that right now, so no. And now everything's completed. So the actual Google spreadsheet itself is located here. And it's a really nifty way to edit a website. I highly recommend using this Tarbell if anyone's interested in creating their own website and they don't want to go through the hassle of writing the HTML and the CSS for each and every little thing. Because you can see you can add stuff on the left and then add actual descriptions here on the right. What we're going to focus on though is this key right here. So this key, from time to time, it can get messed up. And if that happens, you're going to get an error because it's relying on finding this exact individual spreadsheet. So I'm going to force us to get an error by going into the error folder I just made in this Tarbell config file. Within this, you'll see it says the spreadsheet key right here. So I'm going to add in my own error by just adding a 1. I'll save it. And now, when I go to host this project locally on my own machine by first going into the directory and then serving it, what we should see when I launch the website is an ugly Flask-based traceback that in theory is very helpful, but if you don't know how to use a debugger, it can be really confusing and in the end not help very much. So as you can see, it's an API client.errors.http error, and it gives you the full traceback. As with most things, the most recent calls last. So if you go through, you'll see it's in this app.py, app.py, app.py until we get here, and then it goes to this util.py. So we knew whatever was happening, it was probably happening with this content. And so that was really the basis of what we knew we had to go looking for. So if I go to this app.py file, which is located within my local Flask Tarbell here, I can actually go through and fix it. So I won't bore you with the details, but in the end, it gets traced back to this point right here at 358. And so if I just copy and paste this try except, which actually catches that errors.http that's located right here, we're able to avoid the ugly traceback and insert our own error.html. So I'll just copy and paste it in. And there we go. So tries this, catches the error, resets the path to their error.html, sets the context to nothing because there's nothing for it to find. And then this is just a simple way of telling the terminal, for my own personal sake, that it made it this far in the process. So I'm going to save this, and then the only other thing I have to do is go into this file, which is where it actually goes and sets things when you first install it. So I'm going to remove these three, and all of this code does is it actually takes the error.html file that we created, and for every new project you have, it will automatically insert a copy of that, so you don't have to worry about creating your own. We have a nice and easy one for you to see each and every time. So I'll save that, exit out of the local server, and now I have to go back and actually reinstall the Flask in order to get everything up and running. So I'll say sudo python setup.py is what gets everything started, and I want to install it. Ask me for my password. So now it's basically just reinstalling, looking for any changes that I made within the Flask Tarbell, and now it's all completed. So once again, I'm going to create a new project. So Tarbell new project. Keep it simple again. This time I'm going to put it in just error 2, so it doesn't give me a message saying I can't do this. Follow the same protocol. Yes. And once again, it should be all set. So I'll go back to the home, go to Tarbell again. Now I've got the error 2. You'll also notice that this error.html was included, so that's what these 3 lines of code did. And when I go into the Tarbell config and purposely mess up the file again, now when I go to the local server of this, if I did everything right, it should give us the nice clean version of the web page that we want to see. So as you can see, this is what it looked like with the full traceback, and this one is our custom one that Sarah made, and it's much easier to see. It says you had a 500 internal server error. If you don't really know how to mess with the config file, you can type in Tarbell config and it will walk you through the steps. Or if you are more of a pro, you can, and you know where tarbell.config is, you can go within. It says it's probably within this spreadsheet key, and you can fix it. So if I went in here and I copy and pasted my key, I would be able to really simply fix my problems. I know that I just added a 1, so I'm going to delete the 1. I'm going to save it again. And when I I didn't need to do that. When I go back in here, it should give me the full correct website. So there you go. This is what it should look like. This is what it will look like now if you have an error, and this is what it looked like at the very beginning before we got to add our nice touches to it. So hopefully eventually we'll be able to add more errors to it. I know Sarah's also mentioned making it so that you don't see this error.html. It just kind of exists within the local Tarbell repository itself. I have some code that probably will do it, but I can't get it to install correctly on my computer yet. But that's hopefully where this project will be going. So now Sarah's going to take it from here and talk about some of our challenges and what we actually, the process we went through to make this project work.
Hello, this is Sarah Murray. I'm part of the Tarbell project, and my part of the video will be talking about our communication methods and the implementation of our code into future Tarbell projects that people can download. So we mainly communicated with each other and with the main developer on the Chicago Tribune News Apps team. So between each other, we mostly communicated through Gmail and Google Chat, and we also made an effort to regularly pull code from our GitHub repository so that we were always up to date on the changes that we were making. One of the main things that I personally encountered, and I know that Alex did as well, was getting the source code to work on our computers. So we had kind of a tough time, like I said, getting the source code to actually work. I had to completely reconfigure a lot of things on my computer, but in the end we got the source code to work so that we could work on it and test things and such. So we also communicated with David Eads regularly, and he helped me personally with my part of the project, and I mostly communicated with him through text messages and Google Chat. And we also tried to create GitHub issues on their page so that they knew that what we were doing and what progress we had made. So here is the changes that I made. Basically what I wanted to do was make sure that when a user downloads Tarbell and they're using this project for the first time, they don't have this folder here that will eventually have more error messages to pick up more different kinds of errors. So what I did was base it on the way that we hide this folder right here that has the template in it. So this is the template loader, and what I had to do was create something similar to this that uploads the base template to the project. And so I wanted to append to the template directory the path to this file, app.py, which is where the changes that Alex made live, and connect those changes to the errors folder with this join. So that required a lot of Googling on different Python commands to figure out, how to get the current file and append it to this template directory, and then make sure that the Tarbell file system loader was correctly picking up this new thing that I appended to the template directories. So as you can see, when you finally load it, this was our test error page, but when you finally load it, there's nothing here that says errors on it, because that could be confusing to the user. They could think that it's an error that their users will see, but because really it's only to pick up, at this point, internal server errors. So we don't want like a potential user to think that it's an error page that will display a 404 or a 400. or anything like that. So we wanted to make sure that, you know, they didn't have to worry about anything extra that they didn't have to. Also, my part of the project was to create a nice looking error message, and here's what I came up with. So I wanted to make it more clear to the user that what exactly was happening. And so the error that we focused on, as already been said, is the 500 internal server error. That happens when the spreadsheet key, so I see I purposely messed it up here, when the spreadsheet key is incorrect. So instead of having the horrible looking traceback that comes up, this will come up, and it will tell you go into your command line and type tarbell config, and that's, you know, kind of the long way to do it, but also easier in case someone doesn't want to have to mess with the tarbell config file and risk screwing anything else up. So if the user just goes into the command line and types in tarbell config, then it will reconfigure their Google spreadsheet so that their project can find it. And then I also added this section in here because the way that I always fix this, if this ever happens to me, is to actually go into my tarbellconfig.py and make sure that my spreadsheet key variable matches this variable. So I provided two ways to do it, and it ends up being a much nicer looking error message than what we had before. So David seemed really excited that we had done all of this after talking to him earlier today, and he is really interested in having us come up with more of these error messages so that they can integrate it in with the Tarbell 1.0 release that will be coming out later this year. So everyone should look for that and use Tarbell to make all your websites. Thank you for listening.